How you doing, Five Threads?
Woo!
Does everybody have beer tonight? Good, good. Well, we are here to do a podcast. We're called Retro Game Night. It's a podcast centered about all things retro gaming and pop culture. We sneak in some new stuff too. We are here live at Five Threads Brewery. Give it up for the people that are listening at home. And I am your host, Player 1, Damien, and I am joined with Player 3. We're going to skip over Player 2 tonight. He's not here. Player 3, Joshua.
Good evening.
How you doing, man?
I've been a little under the weather lately, but fired up for our podcast tonight.
Yeah.
Waka waka.
Well, you're referring to our last episode. Yeah.
Oh, you would think.
Tonight, it's weird to not have Kyle here. That's a very, very weird feeling to not have my right-hand man, literally, because he's right here normally. But it's good to have you here, best buddy in the world. We've had a lot of good memories in gaming. So I'll say, first of all, what's been up with you lately? Anything new?
For me right now, I've jumped into a couple more games. I've actually been testing the waters with Final Fantasy Legend 2 for the Game Boy. And I remember playing Final Fantasy Legend, the first game, and it was one of those really brutal games. It was one of those games where you could get really far in the game, and if you didn't gauge yourself carefully as far as your items, your equipment, you could find yourself somewhere later in the game, and you could find yourself almost in a dead end because of how brutal and unforgiving that game is. And so when I went over my emulation list and I saw the second game on there, the sequel, I just had to get that started. So I'm only about 20 minutes into it, but I'm already seeing the gameplay is very similar. There's a lot more different options in the game than the first one had, so I'm kind of excited to see it.
Did you actually finish it yet, or no?
Oh, no, I'm only 20 minutes into it.
Oh, 20 minutes in.
I'm already hooked. I'm already raring to get through and see where this one takes me.
Do you use actual strategy guides when you do it, or is it just YouTube?
I winged it the first time, and I'm actually going to wing it this time right now, too.
Okay. That's actually, most of the games I've played, especially RPGs, were ones that I dove into without a strategy guide. I wanted to be surprised over everything, and that's the best way to play it, I think.
Yeah, so what about you?
I've been playing BioShock lately, which is...
The original?
The original, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, hadn't gone through it before. That game is nuts. It is just dark. It is scary.
Do-do-do-do.
And I hadn't played a first-person shooter in a while. Like an FPS, I typically don't really do a more RPG and platforming. So it was interesting to go into that again, but in a different world, more darker, steampunk themed. The weapons are really bizarre and weird. You use your plasmids and Eves, and it's just a very different kind of story. I'm at a part where the twist happens towards the end, and it was really awesome. Like I really dig that kind of story where it just totally sidewinds me into a 360.
Oh, from what I've read up, just wait till you get to the other games because all of the games apparently are connected, and it just gets kind of crazy by the time you get to Infinite.
Yeah, I heard good things about each one. I think that the second one, Kyle was kind of telling me that it goes to a different... You're not really quite playing as the main guy. You're something different. He said something about you play as one of the big daddies in the game, and I have no idea how that would go, so that'll be interesting.
Those spoilers.
Yeah. So anything else up with you? Is that pretty much it?
Right now, I'm just going through all those emulators that you gave me, and I have so much to look at. It's just overwhelming right now.
Am I contributing to your insomnia?
Yes, you are. Not the anxiety, but definitely the insomnia.
Yeah. Yesterday, I had the privilege of going to a podcast. I joined Fanbase Press. I think I mentioned this to you.
Yeah, you mentioned about that. How was that?
Yeah, it went really good. It was very interesting to go into something that wasn't gaming for a change. We went into some pop culture stuff, but more into we had a indie director with us as a guest, and she went into some of the projects she was going into. We went into a lot of what how the filming industry is being impacted with all these different uh, possible outcomes with these theaters being bought out with different companies, and could change a lot as far as the movie going experience. And then we talked about AV Club Online decided to put Mad Max Fury Road as one of their top of the decade of action films. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I gave my opinion. I didn't think it really deserved that spot. So we started talking a little bit about it.
It was definitely a step up from the original.
Yeah, the original was just plain weird.
It was.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this one, while it was still weird, I felt personally it had its pros and cons, but I don't think I'd put it on the top tier as far as what was good of the decade.
If you don't mind my asking, was there anything that you would place up there?
I did some thinking. I mean, they did a lot of what was in the 2010s. So what came to mind is I was blown out of the water when I had first seen Inception, because I hadn't seen really much about it. But then
Oh, right, yes.
But then Christopher Nolan's stuff is typically always like that, just kind of hidden. You don't really see that much in terms of a trailer or anything. So seeing it for the first time, I'd say that was a movie that kind of was amazing to me.
Yeah, nowadays with all the hype of the MCU, it's kind of hard to think of movies that really just made that mark without being a part of the MCU.
Yeah, Bryant on the show was talking about, does the MCU come into factor with that? Because there's been so many, and it's tricky to put that, because you kind of want to add on all the other ones, like if it was one long marathon.
Right.
And he said maybe, or one of them said Iron Man, but that was 2009. So, but then what are you going to say, Iron Man 2? But Iron Man 2 wouldn't have been as amazing without Iron Man 1.
Right.
So it's tricky to put MCU in that. I don't think I'd put any of them there.
All right. So what are we talking about today?
Today, we were talking about arcade classics and Pac-Man. So we'll go into the history a little bit of what role that played in gaming and how many iterations of Pac-Man. I've played many versions of Pac-Man. I just don't remember exactly which version came first that I played, but definitely tried both cabinets, which was the stand-up cabinet, and the cocktail one, which was the sit-down one. I was always fascinated by that one, just because you were able to sit and be more relaxed, whereas if you're on a cabinet, you're kind of more pressured, I feel.
Yeah, I've played several of the Pac-Man games, and honestly, I couldn't tell you now which ones I played, which ones I haven't. I've gone through and jumped back into as many of the Pac-Man games in preparation for our podcast, but there really was. I mean, the one that stands out to me most is, I would have to say, the original, and definitely Miss Pac-Man as well.
I would say I preferred Miss Pac-Man, just because I think that there were. I felt that the levels just felt. I don't know. They were more appealing to me, whereas Pac-Man felt kind of boring after a while. I mean, it's both the same thing, really, but maybe it was just the bow on her head. I don't know.
Oh no, it was funny because I actually thought it was more than just. Well, I thought it was just the bow. Honestly, I really thought that was the only difference between Miss Pac-Man and regular Pac-Man. But then I was looking into it and I realized, oh no, there's actually different level designs which have different warp points, and there's actually differences in the two games. And I think I was just so much of a novice that I didn't really realize that there wasn't that they weren't really the same game.
Right. Yeah, I recall, I think it might have been the Super Nintendo version. One of the console versions of Miss Pac-Man had the ability to turn on the options where you could speed. There was a button you can actually boost, where she would go a lot faster across the screen. And I don't think that was in the arcade version. I'm pretty sure.
Actually, I think it was, because I was watching a video of one gentleman trying to play through it. Well, actually not trying to play. He was actually playing extremely well. I didn't get his channel name. Otherwise, I'd want to suggest it, because he was playing on one of the original arcade games, and he was moving at an accelerated rate, but this guy was good. I mean, every time he hit a power pellet, he got all four ghosts at the same time. And this guy clearly knew how to play the game. And he did that all four power pellets on the level.
There is one guy that is like top dog, and I forget something in the 3 million mark of his high score, that he's the top guy in Pac-Man. But I don't know if that applies to Miss Pac-Man as well, or if it's just the first one. But yeah, there's some crazy players. I can't say I've gotten past maybe the 10th, 11th level. Like I haven't really gotten that far, partially because it gets kind of boring after that, since it's the same thing again and again.
Well, if you're talking about Billy Mitchell, the esports player, they actually did knock out his scores because I guess some of his game scores were put into question, such as the Donkey Kong ones. So they did take his out, but it does look like when I was looking at the history that other players did actually achieve it. So it does seem like that 3 million score. Honestly, I can't even comprehend it. I am getting to the 4th level, and this guy got to level 256, pretty much the kill screen, and I have to give him props, anyone props, to be able to get anywhere half that far.
I mean, you're a bit of a high score whiz with Tetris. I mean, you know.
Well, with
Tetris,
Tetris,
you're good.
not Pac-Man. Definitely
Yeah.
not Pac-Man.
But you know, when you get to that point as a high score, it's, I guess, maybe you could enlighten us, but I would think it's just force of habit at that point. You just know exactly what to do by reflex action and just by memory as to what's coming up next, where to exactly put it.
Well, that's the interesting thing, because until I was starting doing research, I didn't actually realize how the enemies actually reacted in Pac-Man, because I thought, I mean, actually, to be honest, I never really thought about it. But if you really think about it, you notice that all 4 ghosts don't just chase after Pac-Man the same way. No matter how you move, they're not going to just all 4 be, huddled up close to each other chasing after you. And apparently they're programmed with their distinct personalities.
Yeah, I heard about that. Each one's different. And the names of the ghosts, just to make it clear: Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde.
Yes.
But do you know the characteristics of each one? Because I've never delved deep into Pac-Man lore, so.
Yes, the creator Toru Iwatani actually describes it how the red enemy simply chases Pac-Man, the pink enemy aims for a position in front of Pac-Man's mouth, and the blue enemy seeks to position himself at a fixed spot similar to the pink enemy. And what's interesting is the blue enemy can actually change his behavior like any of the other 3. So the 4th enemy actually varies his programming. So that's how you actually get it, how all 4 ghosts completely act differently in their attempt to try to corner Pac-Man and, eat him or possess him or whatever they end up doing to him.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Yes.
Not good either way. I want to say just a couple things as far as history goes. So Pac-Man was originally made in 1980 in Japan. May 22nd is when it came out there. October 10th in North America. Made by Midway, which later changed when they went to Namco, as far as I remember, I think after Miss Pac-Man.
Actually, if I recall correctly, I think Namco was the original maker in 1980.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. So Namco originally made it. Midway had no part in it.
I think they were kind of an assisting company that helped them out.
Okay, so in cahoots with Midway. So in North America, 1980, we're seeing the birth of video games. Pretty much at that point in time, you're getting into the era where Atari was a home console, the old school wooden panel that it was made out of, carved out of the wood itself, and hooked up to your TV. But yet you go to an arcade, or I would assume back then a restaurant or anything that would have the machine, and then you could play Pac-Man. I don't know if the Atari's version was very good of Pac-Man, but there's been really bad ports, I'll say that.
Right, I didn't go that far back in order to check it out, but I would definitely say the Nintendo version was pretty solid. And to be honest, when I checked back at the Game Boy versions, I was a little disappointed. I mean, I have to give the Game Boy version credit because it was solid in the gameplay. So the Pac-Man speed, the Ghost speed, their programming, how they moved, how they tried to corner Pac-Man, everything like that seemed to be the same. But the only thing is that because of the limitations on the Game Boy, you really could only see maybe about 30-40% of the screen at once. You couldn't see the entire width of the screen, and you definitely would only be able to see about maybe 60% of the vertical view.
Right. So now that you bring out vertical, so the screen wasn't a typical 4x3. It was, I forget what measurement it was, but it was a lot longer
Right.
than the typical arcade screens, because there were some that were 4x3. Then later, as we got into the 2000s, then they started going 16:9 and widescreen. But this one was a different measurement. And I'm sorry for not having the information in front of me, but a lot longer, that wouldn't exactly port very well on TV unless you change the aspect ratio to fit a regular television.
Well, don't feel bad. Nintendo should feel bad about this because even 8 years later, when they released the Game Boy, let me see here. It was called the Pac-Man Special Color Edition.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah. So that was with the Game Boy Color, right?
Yes, this was 8 years later. Now, obviously, it's about the same screen size, and now the color was beautiful. I saw it, I played it. It ran beautifully, but it was pretty much the gameplay was exactly the same as the original Pac-Man on the Game Boy, where you only had a limited view of the full maze. So you really
Right.
didn't have the full thing.
And to my recollection, with all the Pac-Man games, at least the first couple ones, 255 levels is my understanding.
That's crazy. I can't even comprehend doing 255 or 256 levels.
And
of
we're talking
anything.
no save state, just you have to go through all 255.
Yep, one time going through.
It's got to be in one sitting, apparently.
Yep.
So I think it's safe to say games were made to be, at that point, not they weren't really wanting to have them beaten. It was more about the money,
Yes.
getting your quarters in, the replay value, the environment of who you would be around, your friends playing, competing each other for the high score. So I think it wasn't about the beating of the game in that regard. Another thing I'll say, it's one of the first games that included cutscenes. I don't know if you knew that.
Yep.
Which it was brand new, because you'd play a game, I'm sure, in any other console or arcade, and suddenly you had a moment that you literally would say, oh, I can't play this part. And I'm watching Pac-Man chase a couple ghosts, and they're chasing him, and it just plays out a story. And then it happens in Miss Pac-Man when they fall in love.
How they met.
How they met. Aw. So I personally have really good memories with the cabinet that was the cocktail one. There was a restaurant I used to go to when I was a kid. I can't really remember at the moment.
Was it a Shakey's Pizza?
It may have been a pizza place, yeah. And I remember just sitting down at like 5 years old, and that cocktail cabinet was just the coolest thing ever, and it's still the coolest thing to me. And you could just flat out have the game in front of you, but have your player, your competing player, right across from you. It was really nicely designed, and they were beautiful back then. I mean, all this wood paneling and stuff made it look really gorgeous.
Oh yeah, the pictures all over the arcade. Oh yeah.
Do you have any memories personally of playing it as a kid?
I know I've played it a little off and on over the years. I think usually on console though. I don't. Maybe a little bit on the arcade versions, but to be honest, I was never more than a novice, I would say.
And I know there's some bad ports. I do recall the NES version being very, very bad compared to what I was used to in the arcade. So much so that as a kid, I remember being like, I don't want to play it at home, because I'd rather go play it at the arcade, because it felt different, especially with a controller. There's something to be said with arcade games that require a joystick, and I would feel that those would require it, where a D-pad just wouldn't really do it for me.
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was trying to play Miss Pac-Man with the emulator that you had gotten me, and the D-pad actually didn't even work for it. The left and right would work, and I could get Miss Pac-Man to go up and down if she hit the wall, but that was it as far as the up and down. I couldn't get her to go up and down on an intersection unless I had her hit the end, so she was stuck on the bottom section of the maze, and I just couldn't get anywhere on it. I didn't have that problem with any of the other games, just Miss Pac-Man. I was kind of looking forward to that because I wanted to see what the other levels looked like. and I really didn't get a chance to really explore that.
I got news for you. They look like the other ones, just different colors.
Really, I thought they were a little bit different. I think I read up that the mazes were a little bit different in
Did they
format.
actually change up the way that you go, or is it just because I thought it was literally just the color that would change?
I think there's some that have the two warp points that take you from one side of the screen to the other, and I think there's others that have 4.
Gotcha. Now, as far as in pop culture, Pac-Man has been the start of a lot of games. There's now a established franchise of many games, even up until today. I just saw something on the PS4 being sold on their digital market of a Pac-Man sorts of a game. I barely even looked at it, but it's still around. I mean, it's still celebrated. It's still done in different ways in 3D, in different ways to play Pac-Man. Which ones have you researched that I can't really think of at the moment that are like that?
Oh boy, for those viewers, I have that smile on my face. Yes, there is quite a few actually. So way back with the Super NES, in 1993, there was a game called Pac Attack, and it was kind of like Tetris. I was thinking a little bit like Puyo Puyo, but it had this unique factor where you had the ghosts come in there as parts of the blocks, and then every so often a little Pac-Man would come down, and the whole point was that you had to have your little Pac-Man kind of work his way through the little maze that you've developed and eat all the ghosts within that level, and that's how you would win. And honestly, it was
But was
kinda
it like
challenging.
was it like Tetris where there was things falling from the
Yes,
screen?
yeah, there was different L-shaped blocks, reverse L-shaped blocks, a whole bunch of different types of blocks, but there would be the ghosts integrated within the blocks, and your whole point was to set it up to make a pathway for Pac-Man to eat all the ghosts in the level when he popped up.
Were you naturally good at that game? Because again, I'm going to single you out as the Tetris whiz because I only know you.
I would say it is completely different. It was a little hard to set it up because I'm used to setting up lines or setups for Tetrises, the 4-line ones, but I'm not used to setting up little pathways so that this little Pac-Man could go through a set path that I created in order to eat every ghost that's in the map.
Okay.
It was definitely a challenge, and you'd have to play it religiously in order to catch all the patterns.
Would you say that was classified as a puzzle game, Pac Attack?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely not a typical, what you would say is a Pac-Man game.
Okay. Yeah, I've never tried it, so I haven't even seen anything about it. There's been other ones though, right, that you've tried?
Yes. There was Pac-Man 2, The New Adventures, and oh my goodness, by our classification, this one's a flush it. This one is a point and click. You really have no control over Pac-Man. You basically have options to use a slingshot and kind of a notice to tell him to look in a certain direction. So you would tell him to look around, like to look at a person or look at an object, but then you'd also use the slingshot to knock things loose, and then you could also use the slingshot to give him a power pellet to turn him into Super Pac-Man whenever the ghosts were around and started harassing them. And I don't know, it was a point and click, it was difficult to figure out, and it wasn't that fun. It didn't have that immediate, I'm going to play this just like a typical Pac-Man game.
Yeah, I can see why you would think that because it's not the typical. Now, is there something to be said about the fact that they've changed Pac-Man drastically? Do you feel, as someone that enjoys Pac-Man in a very casual sense, that the other versions of it are a kind of a turnoff as opposed to the originals?
It's possible because I also looked at another one for the NES called Pac World, and that one was actually a bit more of an arcade style where you pretty much only controlled Pac-Man moving him left or right and then jumping. And now, while the game never pointed this out, apparently according to the story, when you look it up, apparently Pac-Man has possession of a fairy and he's trying to return her home. And so he has to go through these several stages in order to get her home. And that one was actually kind of fun. That one was, it was simple, it was easy to pick up, easy to play, but I would definitely say it doesn't have that same appeal that the typical Pac-Man games have. Now then, there was another one. Now this was based on a more recent show from 2013 called Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures. And I actually saw the pilot episode for the show itself. And at first it kind of seemed a little dark, but then...
Dark, really?
And to be honest, I really didn't like Pac-Man. I don't know.
In the show, you mean?
In the show. I mean, he was kind of an annoying kid. I really didn't care for him too much. And he's actually the reason why all the events set off in the show. It was his own blunders that kind of released all the ghosts and caused the invasion of quote-unquote Pac World. But reading up on the game, which actually released for the PS3, the Wii U, the Xbox 360, the 3DS, and the PlayStation and the PC on the first of the two games, the reviews were actually pretty well. It was actually a bit more of a 3D game, and it was a little more innovative. Some people mentioned that it was a bit more simple in its design, but anyone who was watching the show would definitely be able to enjoy it in the gameplay. The sequel didn't get as good of reviews because it was basically a rehash of the first game. But, like, honestly, if I were to ask everyone in this room which of the Pac-Man games they're going to think of the original and maybe Miss Pac-Man.
Does anybody remember, just show of hands, between Pac-Man versus Miss Pac-Man? Yeah, one. Okay. Because, see, for me as a kid, when I would see it, it didn't really matter. I mean, I preferred maybe Miss Pac-Man in a way, but it was just Pac-Man. I mean, anybody would play Pac-Man, and they'll take any version they got because it was so similar. But the ones I'm talking about are the ones that changed it up completely. And there was ones that were in 3D, right? There was like
Yes.
a 3D one.
The Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures was in 3D. You had full movement of Pac-Man. And then, unlike the original games, he has more than just the power pellets that allow him to eat the ghosts. He actually has power pellets that give him different types of powers. And so with those different powers, he's able to go through different elements, different areas, and face different bosses in different ways. And so it did have that element to it that there was different power-ups. And along with the 3D movement, it was actually very innovative. And I was reviewing it, and it seemed a lot of fun.
Okay. I can't really say that I enjoyed any other iteration of Pac-Man except for the two originals, and I wonder if there's an audience out there that prefers the different iterations of it, because there's just so many different kinds. After the first two originals, and then the animated series, since we go back to everything nostalgic, we're talking early 80s when the show came out.
Yes.
Because I have no memory of it. I mean, I was an 83 kid, but after that, I didn't see any sort of show or any sort of following of a TV show related to Pac-Man.
It lasted a little while. I didn't see when the full run of the show was, but it was definitely a Hanna-Barbera TV show. And it was, obviously it was campy. It was kind of cheesy in its own way, but I actually have to admit it was pretty catchy for a Hanna-Barbera flick.
And it was probably shown during the same time as like Johnny Quest and Flintstones
And Yogi Bear.
And it probably didn't. I mean, it didn't make that much of an impact as opposed to those other shows. I mean, those became big hits, whereas Pac-Man isn't very memorable as a TV show. So I wonder if there's something to be said for the way gaming has influenced pop culture at the time with TV shows. I remember there was a Super Mario show in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yes.
One animated, one not. And it just seems like it kind of got a bad rap. Most of the video game-based TV shows, they didn't do so well.
I wouldn't say this one was too bad, because a lot of the later video games actually did kind of go off of this a little bit, because they kind of went into the I forget what the dog's name was, but I remember the cat from the show was named Sourpuss, and it was kind of hilarious because when I was looking it up, who voiced this but none other than Peter Cullen, the original voice actor for Optimus Prime. Optimus Prime
Yeah.
played a cat in this
He's
TV
done a
show.
lot. He's done a lot. If Ben was here, if I had $1 for every time I said that at the live show, if Ben was here, he would totally set that straight. There's a lot that he's done, I'm sure, that would be so different from Optimus Prime. He's a very talented voice actor, but he's done a lot that has changed his field of expertise. I mean, the guy is just so talented.
Yeah, and at first when I read up on it, before I even watched any of the TV show, I was wondering, I'm like, oh my goodness, is this cat going to sound like Optimus Prime? And
Cats roll out.
unfortunately, he actually just did cat sounds. Now, I will give him this, is that the cat was very animated. The cat was really much a cat. It was a jerk. It was always trying to sabotage the dog.
More of a jerk than Garfield?
Oh, Garfield on Odie has
I mean,
nothing
okay.
from Sourpuss.
He was a jerk.
Yes. He was horrible, and he only made cat sounds, but I have to admit, Peter did a wonderful job with that.
Yeah. There's definitely a good chance that we may see, if it hasn't been already, Pac-Man on DVD. I'm sure that someone's going to publish it just for the sake of nostalgia. But yeah, most of those TV shows are hard to get onto DVD, I've noticed, and some of the friends I've made were future prospects with guests that we'll possibly have on the show that have told us how difficult it is for publishing companies to take those TV shows because they don't know if there's much of an audience to buy it, and so production value is just, in contrast with that, it's very difficult.
Yeah, and if there was anything else I would have to say about the Pac-Man series, is that when you think about a lot of the long-running video game series, when you think back to Mario Brothers, Metroid, Legend of Zelda, if you were to ask anyone who's been playing video games for a good part of their lives, any one of them will give you a different video game name, what is the pinnacle of that for them. So some people may harken back to the original Legend of Zelda, but a lot of people will say Link to the Past, or Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, maybe even the new Link's Awakening, or Super Metroid versus one of the entries in the Prime series, or Super Mario 3 versus Super Mario World, or even Odyssey. Everyone has so many different ideas of what to them is the best of that series. And I would say with Pac-Man and, say, Miss Pac-Man, I would have to say that as old as those games are, 1980 and 1982, I would have to say that those are still the pinnacle of what those game series are. And among the best ones are just the ones that ported over really well onto the newer systems.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said for the franchise. It started a lot as far as what we know today, and what we know of video games started with games like Pac-Man, and I think a lot of it was the addictiveness of that game. Like, you just get enthralled and addicted, even though you're doing the same thing every time. You want to know if you're going to just get to that next level, even though you don't know that the next level is the same stuff over and over again. But it's really that competitive spirit that started with gaming before starting two-player games that were very competition, like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, ones like that.
Yeah, and certain ones, it's for those in the arcade, it's always about getting that high score, getting into that top 10, because those arcade games were always plugged in. You always knew who those top players were.
It was bragging rights. It totally was bragging rights.
Oh, yes.
If you could go into an arcade and see your initials, you were top dog. I'm sorry, but you were top dog in life if you had your initials right there at high score number 1. But if someone outdid you,
how dare you?
How dare you? I have to reclaim my title. So I'm glad to say that I had good experience and exposure to Pac-Man. I would say if I had the money, I would totally buy that cocktail cabinet of Miss Pac-Man, and I'd have that in my house, and proud owner of it, even though I know 255 levels going through that would never happen. I would never go through it, but you go for the experience,
Yes.
the nostalgia, and I'd say I'm very happy with having that around.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, as far as wrapping up, before we do, we have Player 2 missing, but by next month we will have our other show, which we yet do not have a theme yet for. but we'll probably have Kyle return hopefully by then.
Yeah, we'll dig up another older game from our retro archives, or maybe another subject on a newer game that has some retro themes, or maybe in a little while we'll even get a chance to review Link's Awakening.
Yeah, I would say there's good opportunity for brand new material. We've gotten some feedback with our audience as to what games that they would like to have us talk about. We've had just one or two come in recently, but if there's anyone else that would love to give us ideas, we're open for that for reviews. We have 1,000 and plus one video games to go through, so there's just too many for us sometimes to pick, and we're trying to do it. We're not being partial to a game, but we want to come in fresh to a brand new game that we haven't played that's retro. There's a few that you even introduced us to in our game night when we were doing NES days that I hadn't even heard of until we popped it on.
Yeah, thanks to the emulations, I finally had a chance to play Alfred Chicken. And it actually is a pretty decent game, despite the crazy name and the concept that you're just playing a chicken. And you're going through popping balloons, catching diamonds, and dive bombing on, for some reason, wind up, I think they were like gophers or something. Yeah, so it's an interesting game, and it's a pretty good concept.
As I recall, I think it's an expensive cartridge. Last I remember, there's some of those games that are obscure on the NES that are worth a lot of money, at least a couple $100.
Oh yeah, there's so many games across just the NES platform that it's a little hard to find them all. So thankfully, we do have players out there who can help us obtain these games, and there's also emulations whenever a game is completely unavailable for us.
It's tricky because you want to stay legally within the parameters of getting a ramen emulation, which we don't encourage piracy, but there is something to be said with some games that we would like to play on either an old generation system that is just so expensive that to get your hands on the actual copy is very difficult, or much less try to borrow it, because who has a $400 copy of an NES game, So in that case, download responsibly.
Right.
Try to do your best to own the cartridge. Most of the ones I own that I played, but it's tricky with some. At least you can play most of the more popular ones on digital, so you can buy them on, let's say, the Switch now, or other gaming platforms.
Right. Thanks to the Switch subscription, it is possible. Hopefully they'll continue to keep adding more games to the library, and that way, as mentioned before, we can take the Switch on the go, and we can take all of these retro games with us on the go and play them as we're out and about and whenever we feel like, without having to worry about crossing any lines.
Absolutely. We are out of show and out of time. I skipped over our Q&A portion just for time restraint, but if anybody wants to come chat with me, I have $1 off coupons for beer over at 5 Threads. So thank you, Josh, for coming in and filling in for Kyle, even though he couldn't be here, but we managed just fine without him.
Yeah, it's fine. Sometimes with two people, it's just like a game of Pong. You just keep going back and forth.
Yeah, it's always better when you had a good friend next to your side. So
always.
Give it up for Tim, Phoenix, and 5 Threads for having us on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for doing that. If you do the internets, we are on Instagram at retro_game night. If you'd like to go to our website, retrogamenightpodcast.com, you'll find all the formats that we have our podcast in, as well as the live shows and all different projects we're doing. Until next time, everybody, stay real. Good night, everybody.
Waka 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 waka.